They say that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but developers tend to be a little less patient, and we're always looking for faster ways to get our projects started, completed, and ultimately running in production. Spring has an awesome tool called the Initializer, where you can select the features that your application needs, and then it will generate a fully functioning Spring Boot app that contains all of your needed dependencies. The Initializer is a great place to start if you're building greenfield apps from scratch or if you're looking to do some experimentation or a proof of concepts. However, a lot of organizations have created their own curated application templates that incorporate characteristics such as approved architectural design patterns, various conventions such as coding styles, naming conventions, or logging patterns, or organizations may have specific regulatory or internal policies that are mitigated by things such as using certain library dependencies, dependency versions, or inheriting from a curated parent project. VMware Tanzu has a solution for this scenario called application accelerators that allows architects to design starter templates that generate new projects that comply with their specific needs. Accelerators actually have a couple roles. The first is what I just mentioned, allowing organizations to create their own project starters or templates. The second really isn't a core value proposition, but it is a useful feature. Tanzu application platform comes with a handful of accelerators pre-installed, and most of these accelerators serve as samples demonstrating how to create and configure various types of applications ranging from simple service apps to larger and more complex multi-service apps like Where for Dinner. Also, if you look at the accelerator definitions, these samples can serve as templates or examples on how to write your own accelerators. So for the rest of this video, we're going to explore how to access and use application accelerators by looking at a pre-installed accelerator. Then we'll cover some high-level topics on authoring and publishing your own accelerators. First, let's look at how to access the accelerators in your Tanzu system, and there's a couple ways to do this. First, you can navigate out to the Tanzu developer portal and click on the accelerator link on the left. And you can see here that we have all of the pre-installed accelerators that include things like an Angular front end, some C# apps, a Node Express, and some React apps. And then there's a lot of Java applications in here, including our favorite one, Where for Dinner. Another option is to use the application accelerator extension inside of your IDE, and this is available for both VS Code and IntelliJ. So let's look at how easy it is to add this extension to VS Code. We'll load up VS Code here, and if we go to the Extensions tab, we can do a search for the Tanzu App Accelerator, and we'll see it pop up here at the top of our search results. And we'll just click the Install button. And once that's done, we can now see that the App Accelerator icon pops up here over on the left side. So we need to configure the extension first so we can find the accelerators that are installed into the platform. So we just go to the extension settings, and I just need to type in the URL of my developer portal, which for me on my platform is https://tapgui.perfect300rock.com. So once I have that set, I can go over to the App Accelerator tab, and we'll see that it's fetching the accelerators that are installed in my system, and there they are. So next, let's create a sample project using the accelerator and see how it works. And we can do this either from the web portal or the IDE, but since I like to do everything all in one place, I'm going to do it right here inside of the IDE, which I personally think is the best user experience. So I'm going to pick the accelerator Spring Streaming app because of all of these sample accelerators. In my opinion, I think this is the closest to what a real enterprise starter template might actually look like. And it generates a starter project based on how a typical Spring Cloud streaming app might be structured. So once I choose this accelerator, I'm presented with some options that are specific to this type of app. I'm going to make this app an event source, which is one of the 3 streaming role types that this accelerator supports. So let's give it a name. I'm going to call it Event Source App. And we can set the Maven group and the base project name, which I'm going to go ahead and just leave those alone. We can also set the application's main class, and I'm going to change this to Event Source Application. And streaming apps generally publish events of a defined model or a structure, and we can set the name of that event model class here. Next, it asks us what streaming role this app will play, and you can see here that it could be a source, a processor, or a sync, which are the typical roles in streaming apps. So I've already decided that this is going to be an event source, so we're going to go ahead and leave the event source selected. Then we need to select the names of the event channels that are going to end up being used inside of our brokering system. And the defaults that we have here are fine. Then Spring Cloud Stream apps, they usually connect up to an underlying messaging broker. And for service binding purposes, which we're going to talk about in another video, we need to specify the name of the broker that our app is going to connect to. And we'll just use the default here. And this next option will generate some IDE integration files, which we'll talk about in our next video when we discuss our inner loop development process. And then the last option will create the Maven wrapper files, which I always like to add just in case somebody doesn't have Maven installed on their dev or their build machines. So that's all the options that this accelerator gives us. And again, these are specific for this type of app. So next I'm going to click on the next step button. And now this part's really cool. This is going to give me the option to automatically create a new Git repository for my project. And my platform engineer, he's already set up GitHub as my repository provider. So I can just enter in my developer token so the system can authenticate against GitHub. And then I'm going to provide some information about my new repository, like the owner, which I'm just going to use my own personal one here. And then the name of this new repo, as well as the default branch name. Then we can go to the next step and we'll hit generate. And then it's going to ask us where we want our code to go on our dev machine. So I'll put that here. Then it's going to kick off the accelerator engine, and then it's going to create a new project for us. And then once it's done, we can go ahead and open up our new project, and that's it. We have our new starter project that's been configured from all the options that I selected in the accelerator. We have a Git repo automatically created and set up. And now the project is loaded up in the IDE and we're ready to start writing some code. So again, what you're seeing here listed are the accelerators that come pre-packaged with Tanzu application platform, but it's likely that you're going to want to create your own accelerators to meet your specific needs. So let's go through a trivial example of writing a new accelerator and publishing it out to the platform. So for my example, let's assume that I'm just going to create an accelerator to create a bare bones Spring Boot web app. And then we're going to add a couple options to do some customization. The first thing you need is some starter source code. And if you have your own starter templates, you should consider definitely using one of those. But since I'm starting from scratch, the Spring Initializer is a great place to get started. So let's go ahead and generate a new project using the integrated initializer extension here in VS Code. I'm going to pick some starter parameters, like using the latest Spring Boot version, and the package and app name. Need to pick our Java version. And then we're going to include the Spring Web and the actuator dependencies. These are good ones for some bare bones apps. And let's go ahead and save that to the file system. And there we go. So I want to add one additional thing to the project. And this is in the application.properties file. And I'm going to add in a default log format. And then later on, we're going to create an option in our accelerator to customize it. Okay, so that's it for my trivial app template. So next, accelerators require a file named accelerator.yaml inside of the root of the project. So let's go ahead and create an empty accelerator.yaml file. Okay. So next, an accelerator needs some basic metadata fields, and we're going to fill in a few of those to make this accelerator a little bit descriptive. So we can start with the top level accelerator section. Then I'm going to give it a display name and a description, and we'll call it Spring Web App Template. And the description will be a starter project for creating a Spring Web application. And we could also add an icon here and some tags for categorization, but we're going to go ahead and skip those for our sample. So accelerators are really kind of split into two sections. The first is where we define the options that will display to the user. And then the second is for invoking a transformation engine that will take the input from our options and make modifications to our starter content to create our new project. So let's start off with the first part, which goes under a section called options. And we'll create a couple of very simple options. The first one of these is going to be the root package name that I want all of my application classes to start under. So to do this, we'll create an option named root package name. And we'll give it a label to display to the user, and then a short description. And we should probably go ahead and give it a default value, and I'm going to make that default com.acme. You can always change this in our accelerator. Then we're going to say what type of input this option will be, and accelerators have a bunch of different option types that you can select. So this one's going to be called text. And then we're going to have to give it a data type, which is going to be a string. That's kind of natural for text. And then lastly, we want to make sure that this field always has a value. So we're going to indicate that this value or this option is required. Okay, that's our first one. So next, I want to ask the user if they would like to add a custom log format to the project. And we'll do this by creating a checkbox or toggle input type. So again, we're going to end up giving this a name and a label and a description. And then we'll give a default value of false so that it's initially unchecked. And then the type of this is going to be checkbox. And then the data type for a checkbox is going to be Boolean. And then again, we're going to mark this as a required field. So next, we're going to add the field that holds our custom log format if the user chooses to actually have a custom log format. So again, we're going to give this field a name and a label and a description. It's always nice to have a default value, even though the user is probably going to change it. This field is also going to be a text input type with a data type of string. And if the user chooses this option, again, we want it to be required. And now one last thing is that we only want this field to be displayed to the user if the user actually selects that they want a custom log format. And to accomplish this, we use a subsection here called depends on. What that does is that indicates if we should even display this option if some other condition is actually true or if there's some other type of exact match. So in this case, in our depends on section, we're going to indicate that we want to flex this based on the value of our custom log checkbox field. And we only want to display this logging option if they've actually checked that value and it has a value of true. And since we're looking at Boolean values, and that's actually what checkboxes support, we don't actually have to explicitly add in a value field in this subsection. And then lastly, we're going to add a couple of little options here that are packaged as reusable components that are called fragments using this import section. And fragments are really handy if you have option definitions that you want to reuse or share these across multiple accelerators. And we're going to use a couple of those that come out of the box with Tanzu application platform. And what these two fragments will do is these are going to give us options to create those additional files that are going to end up being used in our inner loop work. And again, we're going to cover that in our next video. Okay, so now we have some very simple configuration options. And of course, there's a lot more interesting things that you can do with accelerator options, but I'm going to defer you to the accelerator documentation where you can learn all about these additional capabilities. So now on to the transformation section. I'm going to start this off with a disclaimer that transformation engine, it's very powerful in terms of what it can do, but at the same time, it does have a little bit of a learning curve. So I want to prepare you to be ready to have to dig into the documentation and take a look at some other sample accelerators and also do some experimentation. So let's create our transformation, which starts off here with a section called engine. And next, we're going to get into the actual meat of the transformation. And this uses a couple constructs called merges and chains, which gives us a lot of power and the ability to compose transformations together. But again, I'm going to defer to the documentation for a full explanation of that. So we'll start off with a merge for our transformation. And this first step, and this may seem a little bit non-intuitive, is that we're actually going to include all the files except our Java files. And the reason being is that we're going to have all of our Java files, we're going to put them in a separate transformation section where we're actually going to modify the location of the package and the Java file names. But we at least need to include in all the other files right here, otherwise they're going to get left out. And then that's a good segue into our first transformation, which will be updating the root package name. And the accelerator engine, it includes the ability to use a bunch of open read-write recipes, which is really cool. And one of these recipes is the Java change package recipe. So we're going to invoke it first by including which files will be in the transformation, and that's going to be the asterisk.java inside of all the subdirectories. And then we're going to tell the engine the type of transformation we want to do, and that's going to be an open read-write recipe. And then the options for this recipe, we're going to take the old package name, which is the name that's actually defaulted in our project source code. And then we're going to change it to the new package name, which that's what we ask the user to add in the options section. And the next transformation we'll be doing is updating the default log format. And this time we only want to update this if the user is actually selected to use a custom format. So we'll start off our next transformation with a condition. And the condition will be that if our checkbox option was set to true. Next, we select the file that we're going to update, and this is going to be the application.properties file. And next, we're going to use the replace text transformation, and we're going to replace the default text in the application properties file with the value that's in our custom log format. And then lastly here, we're going to invoke the transformation from our fragments that pull in all those additional files in for our inner loop. And again, I don't expect you to completely understand what's all going on here, as again, using the transformation engine isn't, completely trivial. So please do read the documentation and go look at some of the samples to get yourself started. So next, I actually want to test out my accelerator, and there's a few ways that you can go do that. The first way is that you could go publish your accelerator out to a Tanzu cluster using the files from your local system. And for now, I personally actually find this to be the easiest way to kind of actually initially look at my accelerator. And there's always the potential that at some point we're going to have the ability to do all of this within the IDE. But for now, we're going to go ahead and push our accelerator out to the platform utilizing the Tanzu CLI. So we'll invoke the Tanzu CLI. It's Tanzu ACC create, and then the name of my accelerator. And then I'm going to tell it I'm going to pick it from my local path. And then I use this thing called source image, which is where I'm going to go push it. And then now it's all ready to go. And another option is that if you don't want to use this from your local path, you could also commit this accelerator into a Git repository. And then you could reference the repository in that CLI command versus using your actual local files. And ultimately, using a Git repo is how you are going to end up publishing your finished accelerators when you want to get them out there for wider use. So let's go out into our tap GUI, and I'm going to look at my new accelerator. And there it is. And you're going to notice that since I didn't provide an icon for it, we're going to end up getting a default app icon. So now if I click on it, I can see those options that I added. And let's go ahead and fill these out. I'm going to go ahead and accept the default Acme or com.acme. And I also do want to provide a custom log format. I'm going to change the one that I currently have. So let's check this, put in a custom one, and then we're all done. So then we're going to go ahead and we can click this Explore File button. And what this is going to do is this is going to show us what would actually get generated if I was ready to create my project. So here I see my custom package name that I added that's in the project structure. And then if I look at the application.properties file, I can see here that it's got my custom log format. So this all looks good. And now I have a fully functioning accelerator. So if I had a much more complex accelerator and I needed to test out a lot more of the configuration, permutations, and then the subsequent transformations, there is an option to locally test your accelerator by providing a values file that contains all of your selected options. And again, this is a really handy test option if you do have a lot of different ways that your accelerator could be configured, and then you can actually do some cool automation with it. The downside with this is that it doesn't give you the ability to actually see what the visuals or the visual aspects of your accelerator what they're going to look like. So you still do have to publish your accelerator out to the platform at least to try to test out the visuals. So once you're done with your accelerator, you have a couple options of how to publish it so it can be used by a wider audience. I already mentioned that your accelerator will ultimately go out into a Git repository. And from that point, you could actually manually publish it to the platform using the Tanzu CLI, which is what we did a little bit earlier. But there's also a GitOps approach, which is likely the path that you're probably going to want to use. And I won't go through the details of using the GitOps method for right now, but again, it is fully explained inside of the accelerator documentation. So that's a quick crash course in using and developing accelerators. They're a great tool to get your developers quickly up and running on new projects that incorporate your organization's policies and best practices, as well as getting started with the inner loop development process, which we'll go into greater detail in our next video.